Hello YouTube! In this video, I'm going to do a quick review of the iSDT Q6 Nano battery charger. First of all, I'd like to thank Banggood for sending this unit to me for the review. They sent another Q6 Plus a few years ago, so I'm lucky to have both chargers in my hand for a side-by-side comparison. I've been using the Q6 Plus for quite a while, and it is my daily charger. It does almost all tasks pretty well with a very small form factor design. Now I need to make it clear that I mostly do no more than 3-cell batteries, and for larger capacity 6-cell batteries I usually go for more powerful chargers like the iCharger 406 Dual. Nevertheless, they have different purposes. The iCharger 406 is much bulkier and it is an overkill for light tasks. The iSDT Q6, on the opposite, can handle the majority of charging tasks without any problem, and it's much smaller in size than the iCharger. The Q6 Nano is a later version of the Q6 series. It's basically as big as the Plus with 1 gram heavier. Comparing the two chargers, the Nano has a bit narrower range of input voltage. Not a big deal. The output range is pretty much identical. Now, the Plus is a 300-watt charger, while the Nano is 100 watts less. And the charger and discharge current were also reduced accordingly. Since I usually use a 12-volt, 750-watt power supply with my Q6 Plus, the maximum charge capacity is limited to 168 watts. With the reduced input current on the Nano, my charge current is limited to 96 watts. For small charging tasks, not a problem, but for bigger 6-cell batteries, you're going to push it to the limit. The balance current is reduced from 1 amp to a half amp, which means it'll take longer time to balance the cells. The screen of the Nano is significantly smaller than the Plus, which we will see very soon. Other than this, not really any big differences between the two. Right off the bat, you can easily see the size comparison between the two chargers, Nano on the left and Plus on the right. The much smaller screen on the Nano can be a problem for many people. With respect to the design form factor, the Plus has more curved edges and the Nano is more squarish. It's a completely personal preference thing, and I'm okay with both designs. The scroll wheel on the Plus was replaced with a so-called 3-way push button. So instead of scrolling up and down, on the Nano, you can press the button on its upper side or the lower side. You can also push the button in the center for a click. I am used to the scroll wheel on the Plus, so how well the 3-way push button works, we will see. On the left side of the Plus, there is an XT60 plug for input, an audio jack for firmware upgrade. On the right side, it has the charging port and a balance plug. For Nano, it has exactly the same number of ports, input plug, and the firmware upgrade port on the left, while iSDT replaced the audio jack with the USB port, which makes life a lot easier in case the user wants to connect it to the computer. Fan is on the back, also the charging port and the balance plug on the right. I don't know if the USB port does anything other than firmware upgrade, for example a control program on the computer. No idea of that. Next, let's have a look at the features of this charger and see how it differs from the Q6 Plus. Despite the much smaller screen, the major information displayed on both chargers is pretty similar. Note that since I only have one power supply available at this moment, the Plus is powered by a 6-cell battery. When we scroll the wheel down on the Plus, it shows some additional information such as the input voltage, output voltage, current temperature, and the total number of completed tasks. The Nano certainly has fewer lines to show, so it lacks some information. To enter the task menu, I need to press the scroll wheel on the Plus but for Nano, it's a bit tricky. It has a 3-way push button, but since the button is relatively small, it's hard to push the center of the button. It sometimes took me a few attempts before I was able to enter the menu. Note that if you long press anywhere on the button, you will enter the system setting menu, which I'll talk about soon. The logic is the same on the Plus, but it is way easier to operate than the Nano. I have had lots of frustration when using this charger because of the bad design of the button. I suggest that iSDT make some changes in their next firmware upgrade. For example, pressing both the upper and the lower portions of the button to enter the task menu. In general, both chargers have almost identical options in the task menu. Actually, I found that you can press and hold anywhere of the button to make changes to each setting. Once you're done, you can press and hold the button to save the change. Now, the new features that Nano brought to us are the power supply and battery destroy. These are two very useful and sought-after features that many chargers lack. The power supply function works as a variable DC power source whose voltage and current can be adjusted. I'll do a quick demonstration shortly. The destroy function discharges a battery to 0 volts for disposal purposes. However, because of the discharge current limit, completely discharging a battery on the Nano can take a very long time. I usually just use light bulbs to discharge and then use the Q6 to balance. In terms of the supported battery types, they're exactly the same on both chargers. Lipo, Life, NiCad, lead acid, and so on. Nothing really special here. Next, let's take a look at the voltage range on both chargers. The voltage range on the Plus is from 4.15 volts to 4.25 volts, while Nano has the same range. There is no difference at all. In terms of the number of battery cells, they're exactly identical, from 1 cell to 6 cell. Now, for the charge and discharge current limit, I think the Nano has easier navigation. It has 3 default options, 1 amp, 1.3 amps, and 2 amps showing up at the top of the list for quick setting. While for the Plus, you need to scroll up and down to find the exact charging current. Not a big deal though, especially with the easy-to-use scroll wheel. Like I said earlier, if you want to enter the system settings menu, you can long press anywhere off the button. Comparing the two chargers, their setting menus are also highly identical. It's just that the Nano has a lower input power limit, which is 230 watts versus the 330 watts on the Plus. Keep in mind that this is just the input limit. Your actual input power depends on the voltage of your power supply. For example, in my case, I have a 12 volt 750 watt power supply, and this charger has a limit of 8 amps on the input. So the maximum charging power is 12 volts times 8 amps, which is 96 watts. In other words, 200 watt is more than enough for me. In the system info option, you can see the firmware version of the charger. And I think that's pretty much it for the basics of these two chargers. Next, I'm going to do a quick test charge on a 6-cell 2600 mAh LiPo battery. I usually use it on my Protos 500 helicopter. I set the termination voltage to 4.2 volts as this is not a high voltage battery. Current is set to 2 amps. Long press start to begin. The interface looks exactly the same as the Plus. You can see the total voltage, charging current, and each cell's voltage. And you probably can also hear that after this procedure has started, the fan started to spin up and the charging current also started to ramp up pretty quickly. If you press the lower edge of the button, you will see the internal resistance of each cell. And if you press it again, you will see the info page. Same as the Plus, if you want to make adjustment to the current, you can press the center of the button to enter the menu. The changes become effective right after you confirm it. Now I just sped up the video to 10 times faster for your reference. One thing that many of us care about is the accuracy of the internal voltmeter. I don't have a top-notch voltmeter, so I tested each cell's voltage with my Unity 61E multimeter, which has pretty good reputation for its precision and accuracy for hobby use. Now, I have to say that this is definitely not the best or the safest way to measure the cell voltages. And I do not recommend you to do it this way. You should use safer ways to measure these voltages. Because of the small screen size of the charger, I have the numbers shown at the upper left corner of the window. On the charger, it shows the first cell is 3.91 volts, while the multimeter shows 3.902 volts, so it's pretty close. For cell 2, the charger shows anywhere between 3.89 to 3.9, while the multimeter shows 3.89. Now, cell 3 is a little bit off because the charger shows it's 3.92 volts, while the multimeter shows 3.907 volts. In general, I would say that the charger's internal voltmeter is relatively accurate and has no problem for hobby use. As I mentioned before, the new feature that comes with this charger is the DC power supply. I tested the output voltage with my multimeter to get an idea of the accuracy. While I did not do a load test, there is no reason to believe that it cannot keep the current or voltage as long as the input power supply is competent. I first set the voltage to 24 volts and current to 5 amps. Note that until you press the button and change the output option to on, you will not get any output voltage. To be honest, it took me a bit while to figure this out. Once the output is on, the numbers on the charger and the multimeter agree very well. While you're using the charger as a DC power supply, you can also make real-time changes to voltage and current on the go. Very convenient. It basically works as a 200-watt variable power supply, which is more than enough for general hobby use. I really enjoy this function, even more than the charge and discharge functions. Save me money on more sophisticated power supplies. If you want to cut off the output, just switch the option to off, and there you go. As a brief conclusion, the Q6 Nano is a good budget battery charger. Although it has limited charging capacity, unless you charge high-capacity 6-cell batteries very often, this charger works just fine on most jobs. The DC power supply feature is very useful and is a bonus for battery chargers. I have already been using it in my hobby projects. The three-way push button is definitely a failure of the design, making operations very challenging most of the time. I hope the manufacturer can change the logic of the button in their next firmware upgrade. The Q6 Plus, which uses scroll wheel, is much easier to operate. Overall, a very nice charger with small disappointment, and hopefully the issue can be fixed.